Hello, I'm Chris Mann, and this is another video in my Accurately Summarizing series, in which I show you how to use the rules of logical debate to summarize people's views. This involves rewording and restating their views, so my restatements of their views below are assumed to be implied until they are officially and explicitly confirmed by Steve McRae and The Duke on the record. In this video, I'll be analyzing a debate that occurred on March 17, 2019 between Steve McRae and The Duke on the Modern Day Debate YouTube channel. I have put the link to this debate in the description box below. I copied and pasted the YouTube transcript of that video in the text below, but I did not edit it for complete accuracy because of time constraints. The Duke has clarified his positions by providing some notes with timestamps that refer to a follow-up discussion that McRae had in another video, the link to which is also in the description box below. Let me explain how this debate came about. McRae, who calls himself an agnostic, has been arguing on Twitter with people who would call him an atheist. After many heated arguments over the meanings of agnosticism versus atheism and how these terms are best understood, McRae decided to issue a challenge to anyone willing to debate this topic on the Modern Day Debate channel. The Twitter user, The Duke, @TheDukeIsTheMan, accepted the challenge and the debate was scheduled. The Duke has provided images appearing to show that the moderator of the debate, James, was trying to confirm the topic of the debate. The Duke wanted to debate about the definitions and usages of the words atheism and agnosticism, but apparently McRae wanted to debate, is agnosticism a valid position? In the end, the title of the debate was How Atheism or Agnosticism Are and Should Be Used, and although both participants agreed to this topic, this turned out to be the source of some confusion later. The debate begins with some introductory remarks by the Duke.
First, I want to address exactly how this debate started. Me and Steve have been talking online for a few months, and most of the interactions have been about the usages of the words atheism, agnosticism, and agnostic atheist, and all that.
The Duke, number 1. Steve McRae and the Duke have been debating each other online for the previous few months about the usages of the words atheism, agnosticism, agnostic atheism, etc.
I don't want to strawman Steve, so I just want to give a quick understanding of what I gathered from him so far.
The Duke stated that he does not want to strawhuman Steve McRae. It is morally bad for a person to strawhuman someone.
And that's basically, he does not want to be called or referred to as an atheist.
Steve McRae stated that he does not want to be referred to as an atheist.
But I asked him online if he believes a God or any God exists, and his answer was no, so my argument was that makes him an atheist.
Steve McRae stated that he does not believe God or gods exist. The Duke defines a theist as a person who believes God or gods exist, and an atheist as a person who does not believe God or gods exist. See this explicit note by the Duke. Steve McRae meets the Duke's definition of an atheist.
Now, what kind of an atheist, that's up to him. Whether he knows there's no God, whether he doesn't know there's no God, it doesn't really matter. I use the term to mean an umbrella that encompasses all persons who just do not have a belief in a God.
The Duke's definition of atheist includes 2 or more subcategories based on additional criteria.
And for some reason, he does not agree with that definition.
Steve McRae's definition of atheist differs from the Duke's definition.
My argument is that his dictionary, his school, his way of figuring out what it means is incorrect. So that's my position. I hope I have Steve's position correct.
It is not logical or useful or moral for a person to use the definition of atheist used by Steve McRae.
But that is my argument. His dictionary, his school in philosophy, whatever it means, the way that they define atheism is incorrect. Or it's not modern, or it's failed to be updated. That's it.
It is not logical or useful or moral for a person to use the definition of atheist used by Steve McRae and the literature of academic philosophy. McRae then opens with his prepared remarks.
This is basically on how the terms atheism and agnosticism are used in philosophy and they're valid. Basically, I'm going to be showing material facts that are consistent and rigorously used in philosophy of how these terms are generally to be used when you want to read a paper in that, when you want to understand the concepts.
Steve McRae 1. The topic of this debate is, how are atheism and agnosticism used in the literature of academic philosophy, and are they valid positions? This statement about the debate topic differs from the mutually agreed upon topic, but matches the topic McRae preferred to debate about according to the images shown earlier.
he's going to be arguing, I think, more definitional things, which I'm not going to get too much into, although I will address his concerns.
Steve McRae will address the Duke's concerns without getting into definitional things.
So I'm going to break this down into two parts when we have this discussion. One is the material facts, which I don't think are really that questionable, as far as if you go look in the literature, what you're going to find, and then the persuasive argument, which way should we use these terms? The way that I promote or the way that the Duke promotes?
There are two parts to this debate. How are these terms used in the literature of academic philosophy? And how should these terms be used?
I'm also going to be using the terminology the way that the established literature uses it, although I understand the way the Duke uses it. Not a problem. We can communicate, even though he uses these terms differently.
Steve McRae is able to understand the colloquial uses of these terms. In academic philosophy, Steve McRae's definitions are more widely used.
At first, I think the goal of this debate is actually to see what these words are actually used by philosophers. And I think that's critical because a lot of atheist channels don't put that information out.
Steve McRae wants it to be widely known that, in academic philosophy, Steve McRae's definitions are more widely used.
Some atheists have the mindset that these words are only used one way. And by them thinking that, they have some severe misconceptions, because when I use these terms, I'm not using them incorrectly, as the Duke maintains. And nor are these definitions correct or incorrect, and I'm not using them wrong.
The Duke claims that the definitions of the terms used in academic philosophy are incorrect or wrong. The words right or wrong and correct or incorrect do not apply to the definitions of these terms, because these definitions are merely describing how the terms are actually used.
Wrong is a value judgment. When we were on Twitter, he actually said that the terminology is wrong. Well, wrong is a value judgment. It's basically getting down to ethics and what is right and what is wrong, what's permissible and impermissible. I don't think that's how he meant it, but again, use the terminology like that, it changes the dialogue. And so I'm going to be arguing more what's a better use utility-wise, rather than if something's right or wrong, because these words are not right or wrong.
When the Duke claims the definitions or terms used by the literature of academic philosophy are wrong or incorrect, he does not mean it is morally wrong or less helpful to use them. I believe this ends up being the main misunderstanding that Steve McRae has of the Duke's views.
There's no objective definition. Dictionaries do not define words. What they do is they tell you the most general usage.
To define a word is to prescribe how a word should be used. Some people, like the Duke, are confused because they think dictionaries define words. Steve McRae uses an unusual definition of to define and appears to think that prescriptive versus descriptive definitions are a source of confusion between the Duke and him.
So you come from a school or a community of philosophers, and that you want it understood that in that realm or in that community, this is what the word means.
In academic philosophy, Steve McRae's definitions are more widely used. Steve McRae wants it to be widely known that, in academic philosophy, Steve McRae's definitions are more widely used.
So when if you're in that field or if you're in that profession, that's the context. And so when you understand the context, the words have a specific meaning.
Correct. And you agree with that?
Steve McRae here asks for confirmation of TD12/SM5 for the first time.
Would you agree that is how it's more often used in the field of philosophy?
Sure. And
Here, the Duke provides confirmation of TD12/SM5 for the first time.
I'm not in the field of philosophy, and I'm willing to bet that the majority of people on Twitter, where we have met, are not in the field of philosophy. So that's why it doesn't really matter to me. What matters to me is really colloquially. So
Steve McRae prefers the usage in academic philosophy, while the Duke prefers a colloquial usage. Remember that, in SM4, Steve McRae claimed to understand the colloquial uses of these terms.
however, if that screenwriter is walking down the street and meets a person and says, I love your script, I love this movie, I love the scene where the man jumps off the building into the car and explodes, I love that scene so much, he's not going to say that's not the proper definition of a scene. He understands the context, and he understands that what he means by scene is slightly different than what he means. He's not incorrect. None of them are incorrect.
It is possible for people who prefer different definitions of a word to understand each other and not claim it is morally wrong or less useful to use the other's definition of the word. Keep in mind, SM9, the Duke has not closed the door to the possibility that, in his view, it is morally wrong or less useful to use the definitions that are used in academic philosophy.
So the thing is, my issue is not so much that, oh, well, in the context of philosophy, a scene means this, an atheist means this. It's that when we're on Twitter and you're talking to people, you make it very adamant that you are not an atheist.
Steve McRae adamantly states that he is not an atheist on Twitter when speaking to people who are not academic philosophers. Steve McRae seems to believe it is morally bad for person A to call person B an atheist according to person A's definition if person B doesn't self-identify as an atheist.
I can't stand it when people say, I'm an atheist, when you know the context at which they are in, that they are trying to address you by.
It is illogical for a person who fits a colloquial definition of atheist to adamantly state they are not an atheist when speaking to people who are not using the definition used in academic philosophy.
So my argument is, one of my main arguments is very simple, that if you go read literature, atheism is much more used, avoid words like definition, much more used to be understood as the positive belief that God does not exist. And I'll give my citations.
That's fine. No, that's fine that you have your own citations. Those are your...
Do you have anything that disagrees with that?
Right, I disagree with that.
No, do you have any evidence that that's not how it's used in philosophy?
Here, Steve McRae asks for confirmation of TD12/SM5 for the second time.
No, I'm not arguing about how it is used in philosophy.
Here, the Duke provides confirmation of TD12/SM5 for the second time.
I'm arguing that their use is wrong.
This is basically a restatement of TD11.
Okay, well, one step at a time, because again, my argument is first, not if it's right or wrong, because those are value judgments.
Keep in mind SM9. Even if the Duke does mean that it is morally wrong or less helpful to use the definitions or terms used by the literature of academic philosophy, those are value judgments and are irrelevant to the debate at hand.
So do you accept that, typically speaking, in philosophy, in the academia, that's how that word is typically used?
Steve McRae asks for confirmation of TD12/SM5 for the third time.
I would have to agree with you. I read your literature, but I have to agree with you that's how it's used.
Here, the Duke provides confirmation of TD12/SM5 for the third time.
Okay, but I want to establish, because again, a lot of these channels don't put that information out there. They maintain only one usage.
This basically reconfirms SM6/TD13.
So if the proposition is God exists, the theist affirms that, right? The theist says, I believe that to be true. It does not exist. Yeah,
Notice the Duke's emphasis of the word believe or belief. This basically matches TD6.
you have beliefs, right? You believe that I exist, right?
I believe it exists, yes.
Okay, so a theist believes God exists, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know if we're having a disconnect there.
No, there's no disconnect. I'm just saying it's important that we say belief.
Okay, so you can say belief, you can say think, you can say affirm. They're all the same thing.
To believe and to affirm mean the same thing according to the definition used by Steve McRae and the literature of academic philosophy.
Those are two different things.
To believe and to affirm mean different things according to the definition used by the Duke. See this explicit note by the Duke.
So when you affirm a proposition, you believe it, and you disaffirm it, and you say that's not true, you disbelieve it.
Here, Steve McRae uses disbelief to define atheist. Steve McRae defines a theist as a person who believes or affirms that God or gods exist, and an atheist as a person who disbelieves or disaffirms that God or gods exist.
You know, it's not like I've taken a course in philosophy, but I don't think that you have to take a course in philosophy to understand the difference about belief and non-belief, and knowing something and not knowing something.
That's not what I said. The word disbelief. The word disbelief means that the word disbelief in the literature indicates that you are thinking that the proposition is false. Did you accept that?
Give me a second.
Again, I want to show the evidence for this. If anybody wants to look at it, they can, but I'm hoping they can take out windows so I
I
don't need
disagree with disbelief.
This is merely a restatement of TD9.
Unbelief may simply be failure to believe from lack of evidence or knowledge. So there's a difference between belief and unbelief, and I think they get conflated. Then the third epistemic would be suspension of judgment. It means I don't have the evaluation either way. I don't say it's B, or if it's true, I don't say if it's false. I am unable to have a conclusion, I suspend judgment on it, and I'm agnostic on the proposition. Those are
Steve McRae defines an agnostic as a person who unbelieves God or gods exist, or suspends judgment due to lack of evidence.
three main epistemic states. Now, do you disagree with these? And this is record. So if you disagree with it, I would ask you to present me a source that shows this not to be the case.
Or I can use a logical argument as to why it would be incorrect. But I don't have to present a source.
Because
It is possible to not find the terminology used in academic philosophy to be logical or useful or helpful.
I want to make sure that. So you do agree that when I say disbelief is used that way, that is actually how it's used in the
Here, Steve McRae asks for confirmation of TD12/SM5 for the fourth time.
I'll have to take your word for it. That's fine.
Here, the Duke provides confirmation of TD12/SM5 for the fourth time.
So again, and I don't know how this so long to get there. God exists. First affirms that they are theists. Would you agree with that?
A person that believes in God is a theist.
Okay.
If someone says there's God and someone says I believe it, then they're theist.
If believe is used instead of affirm, the Duke's definition of a theist matches Steve McRae's definition.
Okay. If the proposition is God exists and you don't affirm that, you would call that a weak atheist, correct?
The Duke defines a weak atheist as a person who does not affirm God or gods exist.
A person that does not believe the claim of God.
Yeah.
That's weak atheist.
The Duke defines a weak atheist as a person who does not claim God or gods exist.
And you're just showing that you're calling that atheism, right?
The Duke abbreviates weak atheist to atheist.
I'm calling that atheism.
The Duke abbreviates weak atheist to atheist.
All right, now, let's mirror that. Now, this is where there's some kind of logical consistency here. Let's mirror that. If a proposition is not framed in terms of theism, let's say it's in negation of theism. I want to take God exists, and I want to reframe that as God does not exist. If you affirm that, you would agree that's atheism. Still, I mean, somebody who says there's no God is clearly an atheist. He clearly lack of belief, right?
Yes.
Okay.
The Duke defines a strong atheist as a person who affirms God or gods don't exist. The Duke defines a strong atheist as a person who claims God or gods don't exist.
So now, the theist can say, well, if you don't affirm that proposition, you're a weak theist. And then you just shorten that, and we're going to call that theism.
According to the Duke's naming conventions, a hypothetical theist could define a weak theist as a person who does not claim God or gods don't exist, and abbreviate weak theist to theist.
Because it doesn't make sense to mirror that.
It is not necessarily logical to always use naming conventions that are symmetric. See this explicit note by the Duke.
It's logic.
It is logical to always use naming conventions that are symmetric.
I do not affirm that God does not exist.
Okay, so in philosophy,
But to be honest about my position, See this? I'm still a little bit hazy on the word affirm. I don't understand why we can't use...
Affirm means you think this to be the case, or believe.
The Duke wants to stop using affirm in favor of believe because of TD19.
Words are simple. Words do you realize that words have no intrinsic meaning? Words are just
but you said...
signifiers is what they are.
You said
they
that
signify something.
we understand the concept. So now we have a new word.
Okay.
But I'm a little bit hazy on the exact...
Think it's a new word?
Steve misunderstands that the Duke is saying he wants them to switch over to using the new word believe because the Duke is hazy on how Steve McRae is using affirm.
So let's pick a different word if it still helps the conversation.
Affirm, think, believe.
Steve McRae again misunderstands and now thinks the Duke wants to switch away from believe as well.
Believe. Okay, before you were distant belief. Now we'll not believe.
The Duke reconfirms that he wants to use believe instead of affirm. Watch this clip from a later video of Steve McRae's confusion.
Yeah, I'm really confused. Somebody mentioned about affirm and believe. Okay, please let me know if I'm confused on this. I may have heard him in the moment. If you guys are listening, did he not originally say stop using affirm, use belief, and then he said stop using belief, use affirm, or the other way around? I was really confused what he wanted me to use because he just kind of all over the place on it. I think at first he said don't use belief, use affirm because he didn't like the word belief, and then he changed it to don't use affirm, use believe. Or was I hearing things wrong? Again, kind of hard when you're in the moment. Did you? Yeah, I don't know what you wanted me to use. Why it made a difference? All right, so the theist believes in God. Okay, but again, now if the proposition is God does not exist, would you agree that if you affirm that, you are an atheist?
Still using the word affirm.
Okay, so if you believe that, you're an atheist.
If I believe God does not exist, I'm an atheist.
Okay, now if you don't affirm that, you're a weak theist. Would you
You're still
agree?
using the word affirm.
I believe. I'm sorry, it's happened. So
Here, Steve McRae has trouble changing his speech patterns on the fly.
Okay? What I'm trying to say is, as an atheist, I can reject both a positive claim that God exists and that God does not exist. That doesn't mean I'm taking what that means is that I don't believe. Theist means believe. That doesn't mean I'm both a weak theist and a weak atheist. A weak theist is someone who believes. I don't believe. So that doesn't make me a weak theist. That's what I'm trying to point.
Okay.
The mirror type of analogy doesn't work.
The Duke defines a weak theist as a person who believes God or gods exist. Here, he was basically restating TD23.
a huge problem here, and I don't know why you're not seeing it. Maybe I'm not explaining it properly enough to hit for that. I'm trying very, very much to break this down into very simplistic terms here. If you have a proposition and you don't believe it, right, you're calling that weak on that position. You're saying weak atheist. Weak atheist is someone who doesn't believe the proposition is true. Whatever the proposition is. You're saying that if you don't believe the proposition is true, you're weak on that proposition, correct?
By claiming the Duke's naming convention must apply to all other similar propositions, Steve McRae is basically restating SM20.
It can't be both. A weak theist.
Yes, you can't use your terminology. That's the problem, okay?
No,
and I'm explaining why.
The Duke defines weak theism and weak atheism such that they are mutually exclusive. According to the Duke's naming convention, weak theism and weak atheism are not mutually exclusive.
I just want to make sure that you do agree so far, because this discussion is heavily on my use of agnosticism, that there is a position you can have towards the theist proposition God exists, but
and that's where
God exists as a proposition. You don't think God exists as a proposition?
Theist is not a proposition.
The Duke here misunderstood Steve McRae as claiming that theist is the proposition that God or gods exist.
Theists represent, when you say theist, what you're saying is that person believes the proposition is true. So when you say the proposition of theism, what you're saying is the proposition of theism is that God exists.
And you're talking from that school of philosophy that I'm saying that's not how most people think about it, and I disagree.
That makes no
According to the definition used by Steve McRae and the literature of academic philosophy, theism is the proposition that God or gods exist. According to the definition used by the Duke and most people not in academic philosophy, theism is a belief and is not itself a proposition. Keep in mind TD11, TD14, and SM4.
What do you mean?
I don't believe the proposition is true, and I don't believe the proposition is false.
That God exists.
Right. That's agnostic on the proposition, correct?
Yes, because I'm an agnostic.
Okay, so well, are you agnostic or you're an atheist or
I'm
not?
both.
Okay, well,
I don't believe that God exists. I don't believe that God does not exist. And this is the colloquial understanding, the colloquial usage that you're opposed to.
Remember SM15. The Duke defines an agnostic as a person who does not know for sure whether God or gods exist. The Duke defines an agnostic atheist as a person who does not know for sure whether God or gods exist, and does not believe God or gods exist. This is similar to David Smalley's position. Listen to this clip of David Smalley.
And then secondly, if you're claiming that you don't know about these things, you're not an atheist, you're an agnostic.
Well, like I said, atheism deals with belief. If I'm a theist, I have a theism I ascribe to. If I'm an atheist, I am without that theism. So if you are an agnostic who says it's impossible to know either way, I'll ask you a follow-up question. What God do you believe in? What theism do you ascribe to? If you say, I don't believe in any of them yet, but I'm open, that's agnostic atheism, and that's the vast majority of atheists on the planet. So agnostic atheism is a thing. It's where I am. It's where most people are.
When someone on Twitter is talking to you and refers to you as an atheist, why do you come back and say that they're incorrect?
The Duke is asking why Steve McRae doesn't acknowledge that they are using a colloquial definition of atheist that is adequate for their purposes.
Because I'm not an atheist, because I don't use those terminologies. That's like saying,
Perhaps Steve McRae's reason has more to do with SM6/TD13.
How are we supposed to use the word? Are we just all free to use words just the way that we want? Because that causes confusion.
okay, the thing is though, my video causes confusion because this is not difficult concept to grasp. Anybody can understand
I think
this.
The definitions used by Steve McRae and the literature of academic philosophy cause less confusion than the colloquial definitions. The definitions used by Steve McRae and the literature of academic philosophy cause more confusion than the colloquial definitions.
Use these words properly in context with literature, and I want other people to understand how those words are used. Because everyone can get an education, they can understand the papers, right? They can actually read the paper. Because I will tell you this too: if you go read the literature and you use the terminology the way you do, you're not going to understand any of these things. The paper's not going to make sense to you. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good.
The Duke and Steve McRae seem to be in agreement that different definitions are used by different people in different contexts. What remains is the morality or usefulness of attempting to spread one's definitions and usages to other people.
Okay,
So,
but I'm choosing
dictionaries that have both definitions,
Right.
they're used different ways.
right, and you can use atheism the way you want. That's never been an argument, right?
It is not morally bad for a person to use definitions that differ from those used in academic philosophy.
I think that's the point you're missing is you're using it the way you use it. But atheists are now telling me that I have to use it the way they use it. In fact, you started off this discussion going on Twitter, people call you an atheist. Well, I don't have to use it the way they're using it. Because
You
they're
don't
using
have to, but
There are atheists on Twitter discouraging Steve McRae from using the definitions used in academic philosophy. It is morally bad for a person to discourage someone from using the definitions used in academic philosophy.
I'm really glad you brought up the creationist theory understanding, because there has to be a greater context to understand why a creationist is so adamant about not defining theory as a body of facts, because he belongs to an institution that is, man, there's no light on me. He belongs to an institution that wants to destroy the theory of evolution. All of his best interests are attacked by the theory of evolution. So this is not an honest debate about what is the definition of theory, because an honest debate, you just go to the sources and you try to come to someone understanding.
In the same way creationists have agendas motivating their choice of the definitions of words like theory, so too do theists have agendas motivating their choice of the definitions of words like atheist.
So the agenda for American atheists, and this is straight from Pam Rister, the editor-in-chief, told me this. One, she said, don't use American atheists as philosophical citation. Second, they have two things that their points are. One, they want to get as many people to use the word atheism to normalize it, and two, they want as many numbers as they can get. They don't care if it's philosophically sound or not.
Okay.
That's their agenda.
Okay.
David Silverman has said his agenda is to get dictionaries to change the word usage to say lack of belief, and he doesn't care if it's philosophically sound or not. It doesn't matter. He's politically motivated because he wants to have as many atheists as possible for political reasons. This is not conspiracy. This is in this book, Finding God.
Okay.
It is morally bad for a person to have an agenda to encourage one's own definitions of words without regard for the literature of academic philosophy, or to have a political agenda. It is not morally bad for a person to have an agenda to encourage one's own definitions of words without regard for the literature of academic philosophy, or to have a political agenda.
You don't say the definition of atheism is this, right? Okay. So the presumption of atheism was rejected. Now there's a modern approach to that. There's a modern resurgence of that, and that's by American atheists. They have an agenda to try to get people to think that atheism is merely a lack of belief.
Right.
So that's agenda-driven. That's ideological. That's not how it is in philosophy, which typically speaking is free. So you talk about creationists having an agenda. Well, here's atheism has an agenda too. I'm not agenda-driven.
It is morally bad for a person to have an agenda to encourage one's own definitions of words without regard for the literature of academic philosophy, or to have a political or ideological agenda. It is not morally bad for a person to have an agenda to encourage one's own definitions of words without regard for the literature of academic philosophy, or to have a political or ideological agenda. Steve McRae does not have an agenda to encourage his own definitions of words without regard for the literature of academic philosophy, or he does not have a political or ideological agenda. Compare this view with SM6/TD13. And notice that Steve McRae doesn't see his agenda as morally bad, specifically because he holds the literature of academic philosophy in high regard.
Okay.
So I have to be critically about this.
It is morally good for a person to think critically, as defined as, to explicitly prefer to use the definitions used in the literature of academic philosophy.
And what you're saying is not just, I think it should be used differently, like Flu argues. You're making a value judgment and say it's used incorrectly.
Right. I mean, if I think a
By what objective standard are you saying it's incorrect? You said all philosophy is wrong. Why?
Sir, if I think a word should be used a certain way, that would mean people who use it differently would be incorrect.
This is basically a restatement of TD11. Almost by definition, if the Duke believes a certain word usage is logical, useful, or moral, that means he believes the other usages are not logical, useful, or moral. See this explicit note from the Duke.
Okay, but you're making a value judgment here.
That's fine. That's what we're making a value judgment.
That's fine, but you have to be able to substantiate that with evidence. What evidence are you using to show, not just your opinion? You're saying that it's wrong. What makes it wrong?
Steve McRae continues to misunderstand what was meant by the word incorrect.
The A in atheism must be understood as a negation instead of absence, as a not instead of without. Therefore, at least in philosophy, atheism should be construed as the proposition that God does not exist. Okay, so what he's saying is that if you have the proposition God exists, the negation of that is God does not exist.
Yeah,
So,
I disagree with that.
okay, well, that's logic. You're literally saying
That's not
logic.
logic.
Steve McRae continues to misunderstand what was meant.
If I tell you there's a God and you don't believe, all that means is you don't believe. You are not asserting anything about the proposition other than your own belief. It's a statement on your mental acceptance of it.
Okay, what you're doing is you're conflating what's called a psychological belief with a propositional
A
belief.
psychological, now we have another qualifier.
Here, Steve McRae introduced an additional term, as if he just realized that the Duke has been talking about mental states as opposed to explicit verbal claims.
And we're not asking if it's true or false that somebody has a belief. What we're asking is ontologically, does God exist? So in the way these words are best understood in philosophy is that atheism is propositional, not psychological.
Well, do you understand that that's what my position is this entire time?
This seems to be the distinction the Duke was making between affirm and believe.
You have all the time in the world. I'm
But
curious if you think something's wrong. I would object to
I
saying
believe it's wrong because it causes confusion.
that's amazingly wrong.
Steve McRae continues to misunderstand what was meant.
It causes way more confusion. The overwhelming majority of everyone in college is not taking courses in philosophy like this. Okay, so the common usage becomes, how do we all agree on how a word is supposed to be used? And you are using the school of philosophy as the absolute standard. You will become like,
No.
which is if this is the absolute standard on how to use a
All
word.
right, hang on. Let me correct you on that. No, I'm not correct on that because I don't like being strawman. I'm strawman me.
I'm using the philosophy as your
Let me finish. There is no absolute standard.
To claim Steve McRae uses the definitions of academic philosophy as the absolute standard against which the logic or usefulness of all other definitions are to be measured is to straw human him.
You know, we started off, you're accepting the way it is in philosophy. At the very beginning, you literally said, yes, I accept argumento, or I accept your evidence. Again, show all this evidence. This is how it's used in philosophy. Now you're moving into a psychological state, which is completely something different. But what I'm telling you is, I'm not saying this is the absolute standard. I'm making the argument, this is how it's used.
Here, Steve McRae claims that the Duke switched from talking about propositional beliefs to talking about psychological beliefs, despite the Duke's consistent preference for to believe over to affirm.
So, when you bring up evolution, there's the argument of whether evolution is true or not, and there's the argument of whether evolution is the word to be used to describe what you're talking about. That's two different things.
I'm not asking you if evolution is true or not. I'm saying that
using bad analogies.
these are not bad analogies.
Yes, it is.
If the Duke believes academic philosophy uses illogical definitions and science uses logical definitions, explaining academic philosophy using analogies with science could seem inappropriate.
You're getting this.
Is there a proper or improper way to use a word?
Is it best understood?
Best understood. Okay, fine. I will go with best understood and least understood.
Okay.
My way of using the word better understands the concept than your way of using the word. When I use the word atheism mean lack of belief in God, it's more understandable than using the word to only mean I believe no God exists.
This is basically a restatement of TD29.
That's some of the problems. But let's get into your issues here. Do you know what theological non-cognitivist is?
No, I don't think I need to in this discussion.
Well, if you want to talk about, well, you have to, again, my argument from the very beginning, I stipulated this. If you use your terminology, you have to accept the baggage that comes along with it. So here's some of your baggage. A theological non-cognitivist is somebody who thinks propositions are not propositions, that the whole God talk is meaningless. Okay, it's called a non-cognitivist position.
And that's not me.
I'm not, did I say I was?
I didn't say that you said it was.
Okay, I'm not inferring that it's you. But a theological non-cognitivist holds to the epistemic position that the entire talk is meaningless and that there is no proposition to be even had. So that God exists is not a proposition. We call that a non-cognitivist position. Atheism, even by your definitions, is a cognitivist position, meaning that you can express it propositionally as not believing the proposition. Would you agree with that?
Okay, sure, yeah.
The way Steve McRae defined theological non-cognitivism here, it sounds so strange that I don't think this line of argument could possibly lead to a logical reason for the Duke to change his preference for colloquial definitions. It almost sounds like theological non-cognitivists don't even believe the sentence is in English. See this explicit note from the Duke.
Theological cognitivists do not believe in God. If you're citing them to be an atheist, you have a category error, because now you have a non-cognitivist position being under a cognitivist position. That is a contradiction. Do you see that?
If you use a single label for all people who don't believe in God, different types of non-believers will have the same label. It is a contradiction and a category error to have a label that includes people who disagree with each other. And this can't be resolved using additional sub-labels and subcategories.
Just because
So wait, let me ask you this.
Oh my God.
Well, you're telling me that I understand. Let me ask you this. How is it that I don't understand this? 5 minutes ago, you never heard of theological cognitivism, and yet you're not.
Because you explained it, it doesn't make sense. You've explained it to me.
Okay.
And what I'm trying to say is, it doesn't matter if someone is a cognitive or not cognitive, whether they believe the proposition exists or not. That doesn't matter when it comes to whether or not they're an atheist or theist. What they believe has nothing to do with what's a fact.
All right, so 5 minutes ago, you didn't know any terms, and now you're kind of lecturing me on them.
First of all,
A person who just learned the definition of a term used in academic philosophy couldn't possibly have a coherent counter-argument to the point being made.
All right, so before you get to one other thing, James, because this is really awesome to me. Do you think atheism can be true or false?
no, I don't think atheism can be true or false.
Okay, do you think theism can be true or false?
No, I don't think atheism can be true or
All
false.
right, I'm done. Okay, actually, because you're not arguing that ontologically it's not true or false that God exists.
God,
An ism is true or false if someone believes the proposition involved is true or false. A person is non-cognitivist regarding a proposition if they don't believe it can be true or false. The Duke is non-cognitivist regarding theism and atheism. However, keep in mind TD26.
it's not a proposition. Again, this is what you do on Twitter all the time.
An ism can't be true or false. Only the proposition involved can be true or false. Steve McRae is using only the definitions prevalent in academic philosophy.
One citation that I'm wrong on anything.
Writer John Buck, thanks for super chat, and said Duke both lacks belief, but also lacks disbelief. Thus, cannot be both an atheist and an agnostic.
Right, he'd be agnostic in philosophy.
Agnosticism is not talking about belief. It's
It
talking
is.
about knowledge.
No, that's incorrect. I mean, not with respect to theist. Agnosticism is a state. The first stands for encyclopedia. Agnosticism is the position. Psychological belief to be agnostic on the proposition. You don't believe
Court
in it.
definition again.
Steve McRae has yet to admit that the alternate definitions are coherent.
Hold on again, I'm so sorry. So this one I can't pronounce the name, but thank you for your super chat. They asked, why is Steve appealing to word salad from institutions that have been invaded and conditioned by Christian apologists?
Correct.
Okay, Paul Draper's an atheist who wrote the article for Stanford Encyclopedia. Dr. Graham Hoppe, who wrote Atheism and Agnosticism, is an atheist. Almost every citation I use is from atheists with some exceptions. Malik is a theist. But there have not been, this is a weird conspiracy theory that somehow these institutions have been, theism involved in it. No, these are strong atheists, and I'm quoting. So they do not believe there's a God. Graham Hoppe, who I've had on my channel, hopefully not Paul Draper on one of these days, but Graham Hoppe uses the terminology I use. He's not a theist, so that's just conspiratorial weird statement.
This was a fake question. Watch this clip from the after show.
Stephen, there's also a confession I have to make. I was the one that asked you why you're citing sources from institutions that have been infiltrated and conditioned by Christians. Apologies.
Oh, okay, no problem. No, but you say that, but you're not the one that actually promotes that idea. Aaron has promoted that idea before.
Well, I did that on purpose, just being a troll, but the response from Duke, I was like, are you freaking serious right now?
Wait, what's this now? Flesh this out a little bit more.
During the super chat, I basically contributed and asked Steve why he's citing source word salad from institutions that have been infiltrated and conditioned by Christian apologists, and Duke said, yeah, that's right. Like he seriously believed that's true. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me right now?
He agreed with that. He's like, yeah, and I think that's the case. I was like, well, again, that's why I see from some of the new atheist movement because they actually promote that narrative.
Wait, what sources have been infiltrated by Christian politics? SCP?
SCP, IAP.
That's pretty fun. That's pretty funny.
Because I think a baby is probably a better example than a rock. The only reason why I would say a rock is not an atheist is because I define atheist as a person who does not believe in a God or God. But people who make that, who bring up the rock, is trying to bring up the understanding that non-belief is non-belief. A rock doesn't have a brain, so it doesn't believe. And that's the argument they're making. But a baby makes more sense. No, a baby can't speak, so he can't really articulate what he believes or doesn't believe. But I think it's fair to say that all theist claims will fall short to understanding of a baby. So a baby would be an atheist because they've never heard the claim of a God. It just doesn't believe. You don't have to hear the claim at all to be an atheist.
Graham Hoppe argues, and I agree with him, that babies are innocent. They have an evaluated proposition. Agnostics require evaluation. You have to literally suspend judgment. If you have the argument that babies are non-theist, which is fine, theist or not theist, right? That is a dichotomy. You can say babies are non-theist. I have a blog on this. Again, I'll in philosophy, www.greatdebatecommunity.com. You can go find this. The most you can say about babies are non-theist. If you assign not theist to be an atheist, so you're making a dichotomy of atheism and theism, then everything that's not theist, including rocks, sports, chairs, are now atheist. Into that type of schema. This is what I find to be absurd. You can accept that. I don't accept that, but that is an absurd schema.
Remember that TD6 excludes rocks.